Hi friends, welcome back. In this video, I'll be discussing about 100 plus software testing interview questions in this video in detail, and also I'll be explaining with examples how to answer these interview questions as well. So let us first discuss about what is functional testing. This is the first interview question. Functional testing is nothing but here we are mainly focusing on testing the application functionalities as per the requirements or user stories we have. That is a key thing here. We are more focusing on the functional side of the application. If you take an example, in any application per se, the login is a basic functionality we have that we will have to test the basic main functionality by providing a valid credential, username or password to ensure that function really works. That login functionality is a functional aspect of that user story. So that is how you should explain what is all about a functional testing. And the next question is, what is a boundary testing? What is a boundary testing? The boundary testing is nothing but here, this is a technique normally we use. The boundary testing is a testing technique we normally use, where we are going to test the boundary limits by providing various boundaries or limits of input values for a given test case or to test a given functionality. If you take an example for a boundary testing, what kind of inputs we can provide? Let's say for a given field, which can take a value anywhere from 1 to 100. If it can take anywhere the value from 1 to 100, now we will have to see minimum what it can take and maximum what it can take. Now we have to go behind that, not just 1 to 100. We should also talk about what if I give a negative value there, or what if I give more than 100, whether it really accepts or not. That kind of testing also we should do. That we do as part of this boundary testing, which is a special testing technique which we normally use. And the next type of testing is usability testing. The usability testing, here we are more focusing on the usability perspective, user-friendly perspective. That is where we are going to test the application by keeping those in mind, especially on the navigation perspective, overall user experience perspective. We will be testing the overall application. To test that kind of testing, we call it as a usability testing. Now, if we take an example, we have a mobility application. Now, we will have to test the usability perspective, means where we are going to test by validating all the navigations of different screens, and we will be performing various activities to navigate on the UI perspective and user experience perspective, and we will be logging the defects appropriately. This kind of testing we normally call it as a usability testing. And the next type of testing is a performance testing. Normally the performance testing is a more of a non-functional testing. Earlier we talked about functional testing. This is more of a non-functional testing, where our goal is to check if I put a load or a stress on the application for a certain time. Let's say if I put a load for 2 days or 3 days or 1 week, or all of a sudden if I put a load on 1 day, where I give a lot of offers, let's say Amazon Big Billion Day. So I'll be doing certain offers in a particular day. Now everyone will start buying a mobile phone, so everybody will start buying certain things. Now we'll have to see whether your Amazon portal or Flipkart portal can really, it takes that kind of load. That kind of testing we normally do by using this performance testing, where we will be more of measuring the responsiveness of the application by putting a parameter response time, scalability perspective will be testing it, and also resource utilization, especially when more people are going to access your application, your computer resources or server resources will go down. We will also validating when more users are accessing your application, we will see how your application is really behaving. That is also we are going to check as part of this performance testing. If you take an example, we just talked about certain example, but I'm going to give certain more things here. The stress testing for a given website. If you wanted to do a stress testing by simulating various thousands of concurrent users accessing a particular website, and we will be testing with the high traffic situations, and we will be trying to see how your application really behaves when we are trying to put so much loads in the application. And the next one is, what is smoke testing? The smoke testing is a kind of another type of testing, normally which we use to test the core functionality. The smoke testing, which are nothing but where we are going to test a critical functionality of an application. Let's say for banking application, critical functionality is accessing the savings account or business account where current account functionality should work. Those are the core basic functionality. So in smoke testing also, we will be testing a basic minimum functionalities of the entire application to ensure at least basic minimum functionalities are really working. If those critical functions, basic functions, that is really working, means we can take that build or an application to test further testing. In order to do that, we will be doing a smoke testing. If you take an example, I have given an example here as well. Why we do smoke testing in the e-commerce application? Here, the core part of e-commerce application is where I will be picking the item, I will be adding to the shopping cart, and I will be doing checkout, and I will make a payment. That is a core aspect of an e-commerce application. Now, when you wanted to take up that kind of functionality, we will be doing initially some smoke testing, whether the core functionality or basic functionalities are really working or not. So in smoke testing, we will be doing that kind of testing where we will be focusing on the basic minimum things to ensure that we can take the testing to the next level. Now we will see what is integration testing. The integration testing, again, it is another form of testing where we are going to test whether if two modules are there, I have completed testing of this module and I have completed testing of this module. I wanted to test now if I am going to integrate these two modules, I wanted to see whether these two modules are going to work together. When both components or both modules come together, whether that time the overall functionality really works or not, also we are going to test as part of this integration testing. Now, when we are going to integrate and we test, if everything is working fine, then we will call it that type of testing, integration testing is passed. Otherwise, we will make those test cases as part of integration aspect, we make it as a failed. If you take an example where we are going to test an integration part from front end and a back end. So now we will have to see whether whatever I entered in the front end, let's say if I entered in the UI, whether all the information which I entered in the UI has gone to the back end. That is an integration aspect we wanted to test to see whether I entered the data in the front end, whether it has gone to the back end and it has a smooth transition or smooth data transfer is also happened. That we are going to check it in the back end, and that kind of validation we call it as a integration testing. Now we will move on to the next type of intro question is, what is a security testing? The security testing, normally we will be checking more on the vulnerability or weakness of an application to see because of these vulnerabilities or because of the weakness in the application, if somebody can hack that application or somebody can break that application, also we can check by validating all those vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the software systems. Normally, as part of security testing, we are not just going to do testing on the vulnerability, we are also going to test more of authentication, authorization, data encryptions, protection against hacking. So these are the certain things which we normally do as part of the security testing aspects. If you take an example, we have a banking application where we are trying to log into the application with a normal user authentication or user authorization. Now, if I cut down those things and if I can access the application very easily, then I have succeeded in breaking that application. That is why we are going to test whether application is, whether it is vulnerable or not vulnerable for all these different security challenges. that we are going to test as part of this security testing. Next question is, what is user acceptance testing? What is user acceptance testing? Yeah, normally this user testing will be performed by the end user, not the ordinary tester. Normally the end user or customer, they are going to validate the overall application before they accept the product or an application. They will be writing the test cases, they will be deploying it, and they will be testing all these business requirements, cross verification, everything they do. If everything works fine, then only they will sign up the UAT phase. Then only we will be releasing that product to the customer. Unless UAT is not succeeded, we are not going to ship the product. That's why the UAT is very critical. We have to ensure UAT cases are really passing, or they are meeting the quality criteria whenever we are completed user acceptance testing. If you take an example, real users test a mobile app and they provide a feedback on usability, functionality and overall satisfaction, then only we can sign up the user acceptance testing. Next question is, what is exploratory testing? The exploratory testing is nothing but it is a kind of a testing where without having any much documentation, we will be testing the application dynamically, where we will be learning the application on the go, where without knowing anything about application, we just traverse the application, we start learning that application by using this exploratory testing mechanism, where we may not be having test cases initially, but without having any test cases, we start exploring the application. Post exploring the application, we will be writing the test cases. That is all about exploratory testing. If you take an example for testing in video game, where testing a video game, we may not have a complete test cases in the beginning, but still we try to test the application by playing that video game in a different ways, different paths, and we will start identifying different path and we will start writing the test cases, and also we will be logging the defects as well as and when we explore the application. This is all about exploratory testing. The question is, what is test automation? What is all about test automation? Test automation is nothing but we just talked about a manual concept where we will be doing all the test case execution in a manual way. But manual way, if you execute, it takes lot of time and effort as well, and we may have lot of challenges as well if you start doing just manual testing. But if we switch to automation, that is going to help us in a long run and help us to bring efficiency as well as repeatability, as well as it improves our overall testing processes as well. Because of that, definitely we will have to switch to test automation. There are various tools also available in test automation. If you take an example, if you wanted to bring an automation in web application space, we have Selenium is there, where we can bring automation using Selenium, and that is going to reduce the overall manual efforts, and we can speed up the overall testing efforts as well. The next question is, what is regression testing? The regression is a core concept in software testing. Basically, when the regression testing we normally do whenever there is a upgradation is happening to the software, or if we are going to modify certain piece of code, existing code, then we'll have to run the regression testing, where we already have a set of test cases that we will be running against these modification, just to see the existing functionality should not impact because of these changes or modification. So we will be using this regression testing. If you take an example, in the given e-commerce website, if certain fix is gone through in that e-commerce application, now what we do is we will be picking certain test cases to the relevant to that functionality where fixes has happened, and we will be testing thoroughly the surrounded areas of that impacted functionality in that e-commerce application, and we will see if there is an impact. Definitely we will be logging a defect, otherwise we will complete the overall regression testing. That is how we should explain all about the regression testing. Then the next question is, what is equivalence partitioning. What is all about equivalence partitioning? It is a software testing technique. It is a beautiful concept, this equivalence partitioning, where if you have huge set of input data, we wanted to pick that huge test data and we wanted to execute that test cases. That is really impossible. We cannot go and pick entire test data and we are going to test it. It is a cumbersome effort. That is when we will be following this equivalence partitioning testing technique, where we are going to partition or we make a different class based on the similar characteristics. That is the overall concept of equivalence partitioning. Basically, we are going to divide. Let's say I am going to divide all the negative numbers one side, all positive numbers one side, something like that. When we are going to divide, I am not going to use the entire set of that group or classes. Only I am going to pick a certain number of test data and I will be executing. In that way, I am going to reduce huge number of test data so that we can complete our test cases in a quicker manner. But still, I will be completing the testing efforts using this equivalence partitioning. If you take an example, I have given an example of a login page. In the login page as well, username and password. If you keep giving various combinations, there is no end to it. But if you follow this equivalence partitioning, you can easily limit the overall number of test cases or test data for username and password with a valid and invalid combination, so that still we can complete our overall testing processes. And the next question is, what is a test cases? This is a very simple question. What is all about a test case? The test case is nothing but it is a set of conditions, or it is having a set of steps where we are going to perform certain activity based on the requirements or user story which is available, and we are going to write that complete steps or test conditions. We are going to execute the test cases step by step. We will have a expected results as well. Based on the whatever the input we provide, we expect certain expected outcome also should come. That is also we are going to write as part of these test cases. And also we will be writing what are the different test data is required to execute. If you take an example of a calculator where I will be adding two numbers, then I will be writing the steps like what kind of numbers I will be adding, what kind of calculation, whether addition or multiplication or division, what kind of operation I am going to perform, and also I will be writing what is the expected results out of that test cases. And the next question is, what is defect or a bug? What is the defect or a bug? A defect or a bug, we can call both names together, or we can use different names based on our convention or based on your project or based on your company, but both defect and bug remain same. The bug or defect is a flaw or error in the software system or application that you are trying to test. If something is supposed to work by the application or a software, if it is not working as per your requirement, then you should log a bug or a defect, because that is an issue or an error. If there is an incorrect or crashes are happening or unexpected results are coming part of your test cases, that time also you should log a defect or a bug. That is how you should explain what is all about a defect or a bug. Now if you take an example where I will be testing a word processing software, or your Word or your Notepad or your MS Word, where when I try to type certain thing, all of a sudden if it crashes, then what you should do? You should log a defect, because when I am trying to type only it is crashing, or certain time after typing if I try to click on save, that time if it is not getting saved, that is also a big issue, because whatever I have typed till now, that is not getting saved. That is also a major issue. You should log a defect or a bug for that kind of issues. And the next question is, what is the difference between verification and validation? The major difference between verification and validation is, verification normally focuses on evaluating the documents, plans, requirements, so that whatever the software which we are going to implement, that should work correctly. That is the purpose of verification. We are more focusing on the document validation in verification processes. But in the validation process, basically we are going to validate the actual software that is getting implemented. That is the beauty of verification and validation. Verification, we are more focusing on the pre-development, where I will be verifying all the documentation part, your test cases, test plan, requirements specification, user stories, designs, everything I will be validating. I will be doing verification there, but validation, I am going to test the application, actual application. It is when we are going to do validation. Now, if you take an example which I just talked about, where verification of more of a design document, whether it is adhered to the standards or test case or test plan, in the similar way, where I will be validating a given application like a word processing application, whether it works or not, as part of the validation process. Now, if we move on to the next question, what is the difference between the white box testing and a black box testing? In the white box testing, we are going to test more on the internal details of the application, where we are going to in depth what are the different flows are there, different paths are there, what kind of things which we have seen inside, everything I will be testing, where I am more focusing on the structure, logic and implementation details. Basically, this is done by more into a developer by the white box, like by using unit testing and so on. But what is black box testing? Where black box testing, we are not much worried about what is inside, what is the structure, what is the logic they have written. We are not much worried about. We are just worried about whether that application or software really works or not. That we are going to see based on our user stories or based on our requirements. But we are not much worried about what is inside the application. If you take an example where in white box testing, we are more focusing on examining the source code, all those things. But in black box testing, we are more on the specified inputs, whether I am going to get the right output or not. That I am going to validate as part of the black box testing. Then next question is, what is usability testing? The usability testing, we are more focusing on testing the user friendliness of the application or a software. That is more of a user experience, whether it is interfaces, navigations, everything is proper or not. That I am going to test as part of this usability testing. Then what is all about load testing? What is all about load testing? Load testing is again a non-functional testing, where we are going to test the performance of the application by putting the various kinds of loads, like normal load as well as abnormal load or anticipated loads. Let's say we anticipate 2 million people are going to access your application, then we will be putting that load in a various different combinations to see whether your application like Amazon or Flipkart still works if I log in 2 million people or 3 million people, and how the application really behaves. All those things I will going to measure as part of this load testing. Now, as part of this load testing, I will be testing various parameters like response time, throughput and resource utilization, as well as I am going to validate as part of the load testing. What is test data? The test data refers to the input values that we give to the test cases in order to execute the given test case. Basically, we try to give various inputs to check the various condition that is used in your test case during execution of your test cases. That is when we will be using the test data. Test data can include both valid as well as invalid data that represents the overall scenarios plus conditions that we wanted to execute the test cases. If we take an example, what is a test data for a registration form? Normally in the registration form, what are the test data we are going to use? Normally we use username, password, email ID. These are the certain things we normally use the test data for registration page, and we will be giving all valid as well as invalid test data to test this registration form. That is an example for a test data. Next question is, what is all about a test plan? The test plan is nothing but it is a document. It is a detailed document where we outline the approach of our overall testing processes plus the objectives of our testing, what is in scope plus what is not in our scope of testing, and what is the overall schedule of the testing activities that we are going to define everything, including your test environments, what are the test deliverables we are going to make as part of that testing processes, and what are the various resources are required, both hardware as well as human resources, our risk and mitigation plans. Everything we will be defining as part of your test plan, including entry and exit criteria also will be defining in your test plan, so that if anybody goes through that test plan, they will easily understand as part of this test planning or test process what are the various testing activity with the testing team will they do. Everything they will get to know as part of this test plan. The next question is, what is the difference between the smoke testing and a sanity testing? The smoke testing is more of a testing which we do very quickly. If we have hundreds of test cases, maybe we will be picking 5 to 10 critical test cases just to see whether the application is really smokes or not, whether really alive or not. That is what we wanted to check as part of this smoke testing. But in terms of sanity testing, we are more focusing on the specific areas that were fixed, and we are going to validate only specific things as part of that sanity testing. If you take an example, after a major system upgrade, means there is a huge code base has changed. Now we will see what is the difference between smoke testing plus sanity testing for this kind of scenario. For this kind of scenario, smoke testing we do all the core features or critical features are really working post system upgrade. But in sanity testing, we will be specifically checking a particular area where major impact has happened, major upgrades has happened. That is the only area we are going to more focusing on the sanity testing. That is the key difference between smoke testing plus a sanity testing. What is the difference between a manual testing versus automation testing? The manual testing is nothing but the test cases which we created that we are going to execute it in a manual fashion or a human intervention fashion, where our humans are going to execute our test cases and they will observe as well the outcome of the application. Also they will observe and they will document as well as part of the manual testing. If something goes behind our test cases, abnormal behavior if they see, then they will log a defect, otherwise they will make the test case as passed. But in automation testing, where we are going to utilize some certain specialized tools, where we have written the automated scripts, so that automated scripts will take care of executing our scripts in various different forms and different operating system, different browsers, across different combinations of our testing metrics by using these specialized automation tools. But another important difference between manual testing as well as automation testing is, in manual testing, as we said earlier, because human intervention is there, that means lot of human efforts will go here, plus lot of repetitive, lot of redundant tasks also human being has to perform in every test case execution. That becomes very challenging, and with resource crunch situations, it is very difficult to execute all kind of tests during our testing time. That is when it is always recommended to go for automation testing for any application, because we can avoid redundant, we can efficiently perform our testing, and we can do a better job compared to manual testing if it is a huge set of test cases if we have. Take an example of web application, where we wanted to verify a particular functionality in the web application. Then we will be manually go and click on each and every link, and we will see that page is really having all the information or not. Everything we are going to validate, and based on that we are going to certify that test case is passing or failing. But in automation test cases, not human intervention, it is more of a scripts are going to execute those test cases, execute it, and it will record the observations as well, and based on the observation it will pass the or fail the test cases is completely by the automated way. That is an example of manual versus automation testing. If you move on to the next question, what is all about a negative testing? Negative testing is nothing but another testing technique where we are going to provide not normal or valid inputs for this kind of testing, negative testing. Here we are trying to give invalid data or unexpected or boundary or outside the test data ranges. That is when we are going to use those data to see whether the application gives us the right messages or right error messages for those different situations, and we wanted to validate whether appropriate error we get it or appropriate messages or appropriate user friendly messages do we get as part of this negative testing. And if you take an example of negative testing where we are trying to enter a non-numerical value for a numerical input, when we are going to enter non-numerical, normally it is supposed to take numeric value. If I entering non-numeric value, then it should throw an error message saying that the data which you entered which is incorrect. That kind of error messages, user friendly error messages application should give us as part of this negative testing. What is test scripts? Test scripts are nothing but it is a sequence of instruction or step by step of instruction where we wanted to follow those steps of instruction to execute the test cases. That is the beauty of the test scripts. Basically, here complete detailed instructions will be provided to the tester. If you read the test scripts, you can easily understand against which platform, what kind of inputs we should use, what kind of output we are going to get. Everything will be written as part of this test script. If you take an example, test script for login functionality. Here what is the steps or steps will be there as part of this test scripts is we have to open the login page by giving the application URL or web application URL, and where we have to enter the user credential. Then you have to click on the login button. Then it will go on to the successful login when we enter all the relevant information. That is all about test scripts. What is a test coverage? What is a test coverage? The test coverage again it is a one kind of measure we normally perform as part of our overall testing processes to assess what kind of requirements or what percentage of requirements are really covered as part of our testing processes. In order to understand what kind of coverage our test cases really do cover, that is when we are going to use test coverage metrics. The test coverage that ensure all the critical aspects of software are really covered as part of this metrics. If we take an example, so we'll be using code coverage measure to validate the code statements or lines which are executing during testing. That is also as part of the code coverage. If we move on to the next question is, what is mutation testing? Mutation testing is also another form of testing technique where we are going to check for small changes called mutations as part of our testing. If any small changes are made to the code, that is when we are going to use this mutation testing mechanism to validate how effectiveness the changes have happened, and based on that test cases we can easily detect even small changes have happened. You can easily detect whether it is producing the right results or not as part of this mutation testing technique. Let's say for example changing a operator plus to a minus. Let's say there are certain situations there is a plus operator you should provide. In place of plus, if you have provided minus, as part of this mutation testing mechanism, we can easily check you can easily find out using this mutation testing what has been changed plus to minus, and appropriately the results also we will get as part of that mutation testing. What is the difference between the alpha testing and a beta testing? The alpha testing, which we normally conducted by the development team or independent test team organization. That is the beauty of alpha testing, which is done by internally. But whereas beta testing, that will be done by the real world environment by the end user. That is the beauty of beta testing. The second difference between alpha testing as well as beta testing is, in alpha testing what we do is we are more focusing on identifying the defects or issues before the software is released. That is all about alpha testing. But in beta testing, basically we try to gather feedback from the end users or customers, and based on that we are going to fix the issues. That is the difference between alpha testing as well as beta testing. Then we will see the next question is, what is the purpose of test log? Why do we really use test log? The test log, again, it is a test deliverables. Basically it is a documentation which is developed by our tester, where they are going to capture all the execution events so that it can be used later for tracking purposes. Basically, in this test log, we are going to write the status of the test cases, any defects found, or what are the steps we executed, and what are the observations or notes which we wanted to take care whenever we are executing a particular test cases. This definitely is going to help us to track the progress of our test execution. Plus, we are also going to check what is the patterns of defects we are finding it. These test logs will give us the historical records of test execution, so that in future we wanted to go and validate what testers have done or how they log the defect, they can easily find out using this test log. And the next question is, what is all about static testing? A static testing is again another testing type where we are going to examine the software systems or application plus a documentation without actually we are going to execute the code. Static testing, so what we do is we will be reviewing the code or reviewing the test cases. Inspection we are going to do. Walkthrough we are going to do to find out the issues without executing any code for this kind of testing, which is all about static testing. Now, if you take an example for code review, where developers and testers, they will be going through the code and to see how the code has been written, whether any code standards have they followed, or any improvements for the code structure has been created, any reusability they have made, everything they will review it, and based on that they will provide the feedback. That is, the feedback is all about a static testing. And the next question is, what is test prioritization? Test prioritization is a very important process in any testing projects, where we are going to prioritize the test cases based on the criticalness or based on the risk or based on the dependencies. That is, when we are going to prioritize the test cases, we will be ordering, this is the critical number 1 test cases, this is the number 2 test cases, this is the number 3 test cases. Based on that, we are going to execute the test cases as well, like that. Like first we will be taking all the priority 1 test cases, then priority 2, if time permits, we will going and executing the priority 3 test cases as well as part of this test case prioritization. This test prioritization is going to help us to optimize the overall testing efforts as well, because with the limited resources with us, if you go and execute all 100 or thousands of test cases, it will consume lot of human efforts or automation efforts. In order to reduce that, we will be utilizing this test case prioritization mechanism that is going to save us lot of efforts, both machine effort plus automation or human efforts also will get saved if you correctly prioritize the test cases. If you take an example, critical or high risk areas of the software may be prioritized for testing and giving the feedback early to the development team. That is when we are going to utilize this test prioritization techniques. And the next question is, what is compatibility testing? Compatibility testing is again another kind of testing where we are going to check whatever the software which we implemented, whether it is compatible with various operating systems, various browsers, devices or databases. All those things we are going to validate as part of this compatibility testing. Basically, this testing is going to ensure to validate our software functions or application is going to operate across all these different combinations, so that we can easily certify with our software with all these various configurations as well. If you take an example, any web application, any web e-commerce application that requires to be tested across all the different browsers like Chrome, Safari, Firefox, Internet or Edge, to ensure our application or web application is really performing consistently across all the platforms seamlessly. That is when we are going to test the application using this compatibility testing. What is ad hoc testing? Ad hoc testing, again, it is another kind of testing mechanism where we call this ad hoc testing as a informal way of testing the application, where without having a test cases, we just blindly go and execute the test cases or explore the software so that we can produce great results by doing this ad hoc testing. Again, this ad hoc testing we are going to perform based on the historical knowledge which testers is having it, or experience which that resources is bringing. Based on his gut feeling or intuition, they are going to execute this ad hoc testing. Now, if we take an example, randomly clicking on certain elements in the application, by clicking certain things or click on the certain links, we may see whether the flow is going to happen or it is going to break. That kind of testing we are going to perform as ad hoc testing. We are going to, without knowledge as well, we are going to click on various things to see everything is working fine or not. That we do as part of that ad hoc testing. And the next type of testing is what is all about stress testing. The stress testing is nothing but it is again another type of testing which is non-functional testing, which is a performance testing where we are going to evaluate the software application for its performance, where we are going to put the extreme stress condition or unfavorable stress condition to the application to see how the application can take the stress for a given amount of time or given period to see whether application really produces the great results during this stress loading as well. That kind of validation we are going to perform as part of this stress testing, where we are going to put a high load and with the limited resources and excessive data, and we will see whether application really breaks after certain time, or whether application really going to degrade its performance. All those things we are going to check as part of this stress testing. If we take an example, let's say we have a video streaming application like YouTube, millions of people start watching it, then we wanted to see whether the right infrastructure is there to host that video and able to view millions of people together at the same time without crashing the application or without crashing our system. That is a kind of validation or that kind of testing we perform as part of this stress testing. And the next question is, what is the difference between static testing and a dynamic testing? We just talked about static testing, then we will see what is the differences between static versus dynamic testing. The static testing we already talked about. Without going to the code, without executing the code, we are going to test using code reviews or walkthroughs. All those things we do as part of this static testing. But in dynamic testing, basically we are executing the code and we are going to evaluate the behavior of the application while executing the test cases. But in static testing, this is more importantly, without executing as well, we are going to find the defects as part of static testing. But in dynamic, we are going to validate the defects only post execution. That is the thing we are going to do as part of this static versus dynamic testing. What is all about test harness? The test harness is a set of tools or scripts or a framework. Framework can be any kind of framework. Normally that will be used to automate the execution and plus monitoring those executions as well and reporting the results of the test cases. Also, we call the entire suite, we call it as a test harness. It is a set of tools. It is a set of tools to perform all these activities. Basically, it provides a standardized environment for testing and simplifying the overall testing processes. Like an example of test harness is like test framework like JUnit and Java as well, where we can write and execute the test cases as part of the JUnit. So that is all about test hardness. What is the key differences between positive testing and negative testing? The positive testing, we try to give valid inputs, where by giving valid inputs we are going to check the application behavior, whether application really behaves properly or not. But while in negative testing we are going to provide invalid inputs or unexpected inputs, so that we wanted to see whether application behaves gracefully for those invalid inputs or unexpected inputs that we are given as part of our testing. And the second key differences is, normally positive testing, we are going to check the application or functions correctly for normal condition, but in negative testing we are going to do abnormal conditions, where appropriate error messages should gracefully provide to the end user when we execute that kind of test cases. If application is not providing appropriate error messages as part of this negative testing, then we'll have to log the defects as well. If you take an example of a login page, where I will be giving username as your email address, which is a direct valid inputs. Or if I wanted to give different junk values or different things as part of that username, then definitely your application should throw error message saying that you have not given appropriate username or email address as part of your testing. And the next one is, what is defect triage? Defect triage or defect meeting, this is kind of a meeting where we are going to prioritize and manage the defects based on the severity, impact and others factors. That is, based on that we'll have set up a meeting with various stakeholders, including your product owner and your scrum master. Based on the discussion, we are going to prioritize our defects as part of this defect triage meeting. In this defect triage meeting, we are going to assess each and every defects. Each and every defect, we are going to assign the priority or severity of that for the defects, and we are going to take a call whether we wanted to fix the defects immediately or we can postpone it for later. Also, we are going to decide as part of this defect triage meeting. What is system integration testing? In this kind of testing, we are going to test the interoperability and interaction between the various different components, where once the integration is of two modules are happening, that is when the integration testing will come into picture to see when as an individual component it may work fine, but when we are going to merge together and we wanted to see still your both the modules are working together, and with this integration still it works fine or not, that we are going to validate as part of this system integration testing. If you take an example, again front end and back end things are getting integrated, and if you wanted to see whether how the flow is happening from front end to back end, then that kind of validation also we can perform as part of this system integration testing. This type of testing is recovery testing. The recovery testing, again, it is going to help us to test or evaluate how the software can recover from its failures or crashes or unexpected interruptions. Certain time what happens, there may be certain problems may occur. If software cannot able to recover on its own to the previous state, then it becomes a disaster. That is when the recovery mechanism also very efficiently should work. Otherwise, we cannot say that software is very robust. Even it can happen crashes or it can happen anything, still it should be able to recover that application very effectively. That is all about recovery testing, where we are going to test the different scenario to see whether application is able to recover properly or not, even with the abnormal situations. If you take an example, intentionally causing power outages. Let's say we are operating on a computer or a mobile device, suddenly power goes off. Now what should happen? How the application should behave? All those things we'll have to test as part of this recovery testing. What is all about test estimation? Test estimation, again, it is a process of predicting the overall efforts, resources required for testing it, and time required to complete the overall testing activity, that enter these three parameters of different triangle in nature that we are going to evaluate using this test estimation mechanism. Because If we do the right estimation, we can easily say how much effort is required, how many resources are required, or how much time is required to complete that testing activity. Otherwise, without proper estimation, definitely we cannot give the estimation to any stakeholders. Next type of testing is block box testing. The block box testing again is a testing technique where we are not much worried about the internal structure or what is inside the code of that software which they are being implemented by the developer, where tester doesn't have any clue of what is inside the code. They will only know outside, I'm going to give this input, I am going to expect this output. That is all about block box testing, where we are not much worried about what is inside. Testers are morely focusing on testing the external behavior and functionality based on the input and as well as expected output. What is all about risk-based testing? The risk-based testing, again, it is a critical testing technique or approach where we are going to prioritize our test cases or prioritize our testing efforts based on the risk associated for each of those testing activity. We are going to do a risk analysis for every activity in the testing plan, and based on that we are going to rate the risk, so that if it is higher risk is there, we should put a detailed mitigation plan as well as part of that overall risk testing. If we take an example, the focusing on critical functionality, high critical areas is a key for to succeed in risk-based testing. And the next question is, what is test reporting and metrics? The test reporting is again, it's a documentation where I'm going to communicate a email or test result to the various stakeholders that is going to tell them that these many test cases we have completely executed, these are the issues we have, these are the problems we have, everything we are going to document it as part of your test reporting mechanism, and we are going to send to the various stakeholders also in a proper way via email or any other form to various stakeholders, and stakeholders will review those reports, and based on that they will take the next course of action as part of this test reporting. And also we are going to publish various testing metrics as well to measure what is our progress, what kind of issues we are really facing, what kind of challenges we have. Everything we can, by going through the test metrics, we can easily assess what is the situation of that testing project. That is when the test reporting plus metrics is going to help us to tell to the stakeholder that what is really the situation of the testing project. What is a test management? A test management, again, it is a set of activity which we normally perform while performing testing, where we are going to perform like overall test planning, organizing and controlling and monitoring the overall testing processes or activity. That is all we call it as a test management, where we are going to cover all these planning, organizing, controlling as well as monitoring the overall testing processes as part of this test management. The activity which we normally perform as part of test management is we are going to perform the detailed test planning, we are going to do a test creation, test execution, defect tracking as well as test reporting. These are the certain key things which we normally do as part of this test management. What is a test closure? What is a test closure? A test closure is a final phase of software testing in a testing processes, where we are going to perform all the activity which are required to be completed as part of the closure activities. That process or that activity we call it as a test closure activities. Normally during test closure activity, what we do is we are going to document all the test results we got during our executions, plus we will also track all the testing matrices, and also we are going to analyze the defects, and based on the defect results we are going to provide all the metrics related to the defects, and based on all this information we are going to prepare a test closure reports, and we will put all our observations so that that will get reviewed from the product owner, a project manager and so on, and based on that, as a team or as all the stakeholders, we will proceed further to sign up that testing activity, or we are going to postpone, or we are going to redo certain things if you are not satisfied with the overall testing activities. Plus, We are also going to document what are the lessons learned as part of our testing, and we wanted to incorporate those lessons learned in the future testing as well, so that we can avoid or minimize the issues or errors which we performed earlier, so that we can bring efficiency in our testing in the next releases. This is the entire thing we write as part of our test closure report.